Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live demonstration. My name is Cyril Hervé. I'm International Technical Advisor for Bakery at Puratos. With me today, we have Waldo de Roux, who is also International Technical Advisor for Bakery. He's going to be answering all your questions through the chat and through the Q&A. So today we have both people on Facebook and also on Zoom. So don't hesitate to ask your questions. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll try to answer as many questions during the live as possible. We also have a Q&A session at the end during 5-10 minutes where we'll try to answer more of your questions. And if you still have some more, we'll give you an email address so you can contact us afterwards. So before we begin, let me introduce you a little bit what we're going to do today. I'm going to present you a recipe which is called la Fleur de Noisette. So this recipe is viennoiserie, which for me represents well the trends that we have nowadays, where people want to focus more on taste, they want more texture in the products they eat. So this one is composed of 3 parts. The bottom one, which is a biscuit, then you have the layering, the laminated dough on top, and the filling. So we're going to do a step by step. We're going to skip part of the process so we can focus on the most important parts. And let's get started. So the first one is the short crust. For this one, I choose to have the short crust because it's going to bring a bit more texture, it's going to bring crustiness, crispiness, and you can really play around with the colors, with the flavors. So for this, you can either use a sweet dough, a short crust, pâte brisée. It really depends on what you have available. The idea is to really use whatever you have already in your bakery and then customize depending on your taste. So for this basic recipe, 500 grams of flour, 250 grams of margarine or butter. Here I'm using mimetic, 200 grams of sugar, 80 grams of eggs, a bit of cocoa powder because I'm going to make it with chocolate, and a bit of water. So as usual, mix all the dry ingredients together until it's a bit sandy, then add the liquids, mix until it's homogeneous, not too much, let it rest, and then we're going to laminate it to 2.5 millimeters and cut rings of 9 centimeter diameter. So depending on what you're going to do with this recipe, and it's going to really matter about the filling, we can or not pre-bake them. Today I chose to pre-bake them because the filling I'm using contains quite a lot of fat, and it's going to give a lot of humidity to the dough, so it's better for me to pre-bake them slightly before. So I'm just going to bake them at 170 degrees for 4 or 5 minutes, so they release a bit of that humidity, and then it's better. But if you prefer, and if you fill it or not before baking, you can also just use the dough as such, keep it in the freezer, and just use it whenever you want. A couple ideas to customize a bit more this recipe. Here today I'm using with chocolate, but you can also use a plain dough with chocolate chips. You can have inclusions such as hazelnut pieces, almond pieces, pistachio powder, whatever you feel like. Lemon zest, agrumes. As long as it works, go crazy. It's also really nice to link it with the filling you will have and eventually the colors you will add during the process. Now, let's go straight to, for me, the most important part, which is the layering. So for this, we're going to use a traditional recipe of croissant, strong flour with a high level of protein, so we have good strength in our dough, sugar, salt, a bit of improver, fresh yeast, margarine for the plasticity, and here I also have liquid sourdough based on wheat flour, which is going to bring all those lactic flavors, that is going to enhance it and really bring out that flavor. So 1 kilo of flour, here I'm only using 80 grams of sugar because the recipe is already quite sweet. We have the praline, the chocolate, it's going to have syrup on top. So I'm not putting too much sugar. 20 grams of salt, 50 grams of fresh yeast, 10 grams of improver because I usually make my products in overnight or I'm using the freezer. So it's better to always stabilize the quality. 50 grams of margarine to have a really good plasticity when we work, and also it's going to help us having a nice development of the dough. And here I have 50 grams of sourdough. So it's a very basic recipe. I'm going to usually go for 45 to 48% of hydration. So we always have a stiff dough. So it makes it easier to work with. and always work with the cool temperature as much as you can. So you always have a very great elasticity and workability during the process. So for this recipe, what I do is I mix 4 minutes in first speed and 4 minutes in second speed. And at the end, I cut my dough in 75% on one side, 25% on the other. The 25% that I put aside, I'm going to mix it again with cocoa powder. So usually I add 3 to 5% of cocoa powder and the same amount in water, so it doesn't dry too much. This dough is going to go on top, it's going to be there to make our bicolor dough. As usual, here I'm using 25%. Feel free to change that depending on your taste and preferences. You can go for 20%. I wouldn't go too low, such as 15, because then it's going to be very, very thin and it might break during the process and afterward. But for me, 25% is a good balance. So for the main dough, I always undermix it slightly because during the lamination, we're going to develop more the gluten network. So it's better not to go too far for this one. But the one with the chocolate, we can develop it further and have, let's say, 100% mix. So let's start right away with the lamination. For this one, I'm going to use the mimetic lamination. So it's a specialty fat based on vegetable oils, especially for lamination, but you can use whatever you have available in your country, depending on preferences. If you prefer to use butter or if you have harder margarines, this one is a margarine that has approximately the same workability than butter. And I'll bring it back on the table so you can see better. When I prepare my lamination, I always make sure that my dough is double the size as my lamination fat to make sure that I have something very regular. It's very, very important for me to make sure that our layering is really perfect and that we don't have any space without margarine or without dough, because this viennoiserie, we're gonna have the layers facing upwards. So it's very, very important for me to have a layering that is perfect with any defects and that is very regular. Small tip here, I'm not going to use the same amount of fat as usual. I'm going to reduce it slightly because, as I just said, the layers are going to be facing upwards. So it's going to mean that the fat will be able to release towards the top and also towards the bottom. So it's better for me to have a little bit less fat and eventually go slightly higher in layering. Here I will go for 16, but if you can 20 layers or even slightly more, it can also be a good idea. And that's also why I'm most of the time pre-baking slightly the shot crust at the bottom, so that during the baking, all the fat contained in the layering will tend to go downwards. So we don't want the dough to get too much of that fat and too humid as well. So we close it nicely. We have something very regular. Just personal preference, I always cut the side, so I have a bit more regularity during my process. And here we go. Not too much flour. And as I just said, we're going to do 2 double folds here. So it's going to give us a total amount of 16 layers. So you see, when we cut the side, it actually gives us a better regularity when we give it much more length. So double fold. As usual, we make sure there's no air bubbles inside. We close it. It's nice and square. We can go again because here my dough has a nice plasticity. My fat as well. For me, I always prefer to give the 2 folds right away, one after the other, so that I don't have my dough that start proofing and where I start having air bubbles that could break eventually layering after. Giving the second fold right away. Now we have 2 times 4 layers, so 4 by 4, 16. I wouldn't go as low as 12 because, as I just said, if you have too much fat between those layers, then it might look a bit irregular, like it's gonna really release a lot of fat during the baking. So really, my recommendation for this would be to go 16 layers. So here I have 20% of fat to 25 on the dough, on the total amount of dough. I would really recommend going for 25 just to ensure that you have really good lamination. But you can really go down to 20% eventually to avoid having too much fat between those layers. So before I put back my dough in the freezer for the final rest, I'm gonna put the colored dough on top right away. So what I did before I prepared it, I already made it rectangular. I gave it a single fold, so it has a little bit the same way of extended than my main dough, and it's really easy then to laminate. So here actually, I will put it right away on top. Make sure that it's a little bit humid so it sticks together. I try to avoid using too much flour during the process. And if it doesn't stick, don't hesitate to put a little bit of water, just a little bit, so they stick together. So we start with one corner, extend it. Here we're really gonna make sure that we don't have any air bubbles as well. And now it's my resting time. So just before I put it back to the freezer or to the fridge, I'm always gonna bring it down in thickness so it gets to cold much faster. So now I've finished at around 2 centimeters thickness, actually 3. So it's going to be much faster to get the cold. And as you can see, if cameraman can zoom in. We have a nice layering, and it's really important for that kind of item. And it goes to the fridge or the freezer for about 20 minutes, and then we can go again and do our final lamination. For the final lamination, for this one, I'm usually basing myself depending on what I want to create at the end. So for this product, I'm aiming at around 80 gram, 85 gram total, maybe 90. That's for me a good weight to go for. So the buttons I have made of short crust are about 15 grams. I'm gonna have, let's say, 15 grams of filling as well, 15 to 20 grams. So I'll aim to have 50 grams of laminated dough as well. So then, bit of math, I will have 5 petals. Each petal would be 10 grams. So here I laminated my dough at 2.7 millimeters, and I'm gonna cut stripes of 9 centimeter long by 2.5 centimeter wide. I'm gonna explain that in a minute. So depending what you want for this shape, depending if you're gonna have a filling inside those petals or just in the middle, you will adapt the size of your petals. Here, the diameter of my molds, these are silicone molds, is 10 centimeter. I'm actually gonna do those petals 9 centimeter long because I actually want to have a little bit of space in the middle. So then after I can press down my filling and it's not gonna be moving upwards due to the strength of the dough. So also 2.5 centimeter of height, because here it's 2 centimeter deep. I want them to be slightly above to be a bit more chunky, and for me it's gonna look good. Okay. What you can also keep in mind for this is that this dough, once you have the petals formed, if you put the filling inside, it's going to be very crucial to keep in mind, is it going to be bake stable or not? Because one of the main problems when you do this kind of shape is that the dough is going to expand a lot, but your filling usually isn't. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use chocolate sticks, normal chocolate sticks that we use for pain au chocolat. These ones are the Belle Chocolat cacao paste. I've already got them in quarters. So I'm going to put each time 2 small pieces in each petal. So it's going to fill the gap. And also it's going to be a bit more indulgent. We're going to have a bit more chocolate. There's never enough chocolate for me. So that's going to do it. So we're going to have 5 petals, the chocolate inside. And after the proofing, we're going to put the panini. So for this one, I've decided to go for a bicolor dough, but only if you really want to make it plain, go ahead. You can change the colors. You can make it with 2 colors if you want. It really depends what you want to create. You can adapt it depending on the filling. If you have a fruit filling in the middle, for example, if you have a cherry filling or a strawberry filling, you can go for red. Go crazy once again. Try to personalize it, make it your own. You can make a small reminder depending on what you put inside the shot crust. Why not also flavoring a little bit your dough? And here we're just going to form those petals. Right. For us, it's really important that we leave a bit of space in the middle so that when it's going to proof, we still have that space afterwards. So when we're going to put our filling, the dough is not going to push it towards up. To save some time, you can always like prepare them in advance, freeze them, put multiple colors if you want. If you don't put any filling, at this stage, it's going to have a small gap. So it can also be a good idea to fill it after baking if you have a feeling that it's less bake stable. If you just want to put something that is very more liquid, like a traditional praline, for example. I've so many people doing that online. So once again, make it your own, make the filling that you want to use. Any questions so far?
Yeah, all answered. Thank you. Explanation is very clear. Congratulations.
Here I'm making them individual portion, let's say, but I'll show you afterwards. You can really make them bigger depending on the size of your mold. Just try to keep in mind what's the weight that you're going for and how it's going to move during the baking, so you can eventually adapt the thickness of your petals, the amount of them, the size, the weight, and really make sure that you have something that looks nice afterwards. Because here it's really the goal of having not only different texture, a really good taste, but also something that looks nice and it's very appetizing to the eye. Some couple petal here. So here we put the chocolate right away inside the petal. So it's going to also hold them upwards. I see we have a question. Tell me, Waldo.
Something people miss is the diameter from the.
So the molds here are 10 centimeter diameter. So that's why I do 9 centimeter long for each petal, so that it's actually not the complete size of the diameter. So when I fold it, I still have a bit of space in the middle. And do not worry if you missed anything regarding the measurements, regarding the ingredients. You can always ask the recipe at the end of the session, and we'll send it to you today or tomorrow, depending. So one thing that is also good for me using this flexible chocolate is that when it melts, it's also gonna, let's say, keep together the laminated dough and the shot bursts at the bottom and really stick them together. One thing that you can do, for example, if you have chocolate chips that are bake-stable as well, you can melt them, mix them with nuts, and then bite them into the petals. Just be careful not to put chocolate on the layering, but you can also put some inflosion in it. That can also be nice. Personalize it. And then you put it right away in the proofing box. So once they're proofed, as you can see, we have a small space in the middle. It's going to really make sure that our filling is not pushed up by the layering. So for the filling today, I'm using Carat Super Crème Nutolade. It's a chocolate-based filling with hazelnut inside. We have 13% hazelnut in it. So I've piped approximately 15-20 grams of filling inside the silicone mold. I've sprinkled it with a bit of roasted hazelnut, and I press it down to the bottom. For those of you who are wondering, for the proofing, usually I'm proofing at around 28, 29 degrees Celsius for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Those are small pieces, so they tend to proof quite fast. And I also don't want to have them overproofed so that after they don't collapse. And here I can bake them straight away. Today I'm going to bake them in a deck oven at 210 degrees for about 17, 18 minutes. But you can also use a convection oven or a rack oven depending on what you have available in your country and in your bakery. For example, when I bake in a convection oven, I'll start at 190 with medium ventilation, and then I'll drop it down to 170. I do not use any glaze on it, such as egg wash or egg wash replacement, because I don't want it to stick the layers. What I will do though is at the end, you can add a syrup to bring out those layers and eventually put it back in the oven for a couple of minutes so it caramelizes and gives a bit of shine. So here, as you can see, this is the final product. We have the short crust at the bottom, the layers, and then the filling on top. We have the chocolate sticks that really hold it together, and our filling that didn't move and that stayed really crispy on top with those hazelnuts. To give you also a couple ideas, you can, as I said, change the color, use a different short crust. You can add some chocolate chips, for example, like this. You can use a cookie dough, for example, to make it even more indulgent, to appeal to the younger generation, maybe. And here, really go crazy with the filling. Here I've used cherry filling. Here I've used some passion fruit filling. So really make it your own. Try to personalize it as much as you can, and then try different shapes. Make it bigger to share or not, depending what you prefer. And that's about it. So now, if you have any questions, now's the time.
The first question you were about the recipe, the short crust.
All, as I said, all the recipe, measurements, baking time, process, this will be in the recipe. You can always ask it at the end. We'll give you an email so you can reach out to us. And if you also have any more questions, feel free to send them with it. We'll be always happy to help. Just going to wait a couple more minutes if there is a question coming. How's that looking, Roldo, on Facebook, on Zoom? Well, if there is no question, I'm going to thank you all for joining this live session. Thank you for spending some time with us and listening to this recipe. Now, for those of you who are on Zoom, you will see a poll appearing on your screen where we will ask you what you thought about this presentation, if you like it, and if you join more of them. You'll also get the email address so you can ask for the recipe or any more questions that you may have. And for the others on Facebook, don't hesitate to leave more of your questions in the comment, share it with your friend, like, of course, and see you in the next one.